SG2 Perspectives is being renamed Edge Perspectives. Same great host, same great content. We're going to expand the way we cover data-driven market intelligence, quality, and operations. This is Edge Perspectives, a weekly conversation about the biggest insights that span market intelligence, quality, and operations with the Vizient Strategy Intelligence team and other experts.
Using the data to also set those goals and KPIs early on in the partnership should be key. What does success look like, and make sure both partners align so you have something to measure throughout to determine when does it make sense to pivot our partnership.
Welcome to Edge Perspectives. I am your host for today's episode, Jayme Zage. I am joined by my colleagues, LaRose and Jen Goff. The three of us, including a few of our other teammates, spent the last 4 or 5 months working on some research related to partnerships. We get a lot of questions on partnerships, and we cover partnerships throughout the year. We've been doing it for a long time. So we wanted to take a slightly different spin on our insights and what's important to successfully managing intense strategic partnerships. We landed on this data-driven approach to partnerships. They also have experience in their past careers working with providers, managing and implementing some of these partnerships. I thought they'd be able to bring some of that additional insight to the conversation today. So thank you, Jen and Megan, for being with me today. Let's start by the term partnerships. We know it means a lot of different things to a lot of different stakeholders across the healthcare ecosystem. We specifically wanted to focus on these more intensive strategic partnerships. Let's share our definition with the audience on what that is. Jen, kick us off here.
In healthcare, we use the word partnership so interchangeably. It's very broad. It means so many different things. Every time I talk to someone about partnerships, we always have to say, well, what type of partnership are we talking about? What is so key is we focused on strategic partnerships. These are going to be more contractional relationships where both parties are investing multiple resources. That could be time, expertise, and a lot of times capital to achieve a specific goal. There's usually some strategic objective. Some great examples. It could be a partnership to help with bed leasing agreements or co-developing a specific program together. The publication where we talk about this, we use a great example of a community hospital partnering with an academic medical center to co-develop a program around cardiovascular to help that community hospital keep certain cardiovascular care within the community. They were working together. That's the key thing. These are typically contractual, tied to some strategic objective. They often require a lot more resources and rigor beyond that. This is so different than transactional type of relationships where you might be having a relationship with someone that's more outsourcing or buying a specific vendor around equipment or some type of supply. There's also relationships that we hear a lot about where someone within the community, you're partnering together, but it's more about referrals and having a streamlining referral relationship where these are requiring a lot more resources from the organization. There's a lot of people that are listening are thinking about joint ventures. We do touch a little bit on that a joint venture is more integrated. That requires a lot more resources. A lot of organizations think of joint ventures as well as a partnership. Megan, what else would you add to that?
There's such a huge spectrum of partnerships, and with the transactional on one end, joint ventures on the other, but we're focused on that middle where organizations have to be much more intentional and come with a joint governance and shared accountability structure. Identify the gaps in your capabilities where you need to lean into a partner to align more with your growth strategy.
The other thing that we landed on as well as we looked across that spectrum was the timeline of these partnerships. Transactional, each transaction is a different one and done. And then the collaborative could last for months, but we start to get into strategic. And now we're trying to intentionally have something that's going to last for a longer period of time. And obviously joint ventures, you hope they persist for a really long time and the ultimate moving towards M&A. I want to also touch on something in the work that thinks about the risk. Why are strategic partnerships so high risk? Using your historical career knowledge here, could touch on what makes them challenging and really risky.
At a more basic level, it is a level of investment, whether that be time, capital, staffing, but also a risk of alignment. You're putting two organizations with different cultures, different incentives, or even timelines in how they work together and asking them to operate as one. And if you don't have a clear answer as to why are you doing this partnership in the first place, there's a lot of risk for that alignment to break down. Jen, what would you add?
A lot of times when you're partnering, there was some gap or a long-term goal that you wanted to achieve. So what happens is when you're partnering, you're also relying on a partner to achieve that goal. That could be growth, it could be quality, some type of performance. So your stakes are just higher. Not only are you investing resources and capital, you're also using this partnership to hit some strategic long-term goal. And if you're not aligned together, what will happen is you might not achieve that goal. And then you just lost not only the capital investments, but your time to achieve that. Let's say it was a growth thing and you were aiming to add more market share or get certain performance. You may not be achieving that. And now you're actually back to zero. Maybe you made a little bit of headway. So we have to take that. We're using these because these are strategic partnerships to hit some goal. And it actually could impact you achieving a goal if that partnership does not work.
You touched on another key element we put into what we deem the life cycle of the partnership. That first phase is identifying that strategic why and making sure that it's very clear that these are big goals that you're working towards, that you're going to leverage a more strategic partnership in. The little goals are the ones that you can get done easily. These are the big goals that take years to do. And that's why you need a longer term investment in a longer term partner. We also spent a lot of time through that life cycle talking about data to manage risk. Maybe we can start here by the upfront work in those first couple of stages that lay the groundwork for the partnership.
If we think about the partnership lifestyle and we think about strategic planning in general, a lot of times in strategic planning, you use a lot of data. You use the data to understand what's the future demand going to be? What are the current gaps we have? How can we use the data to understand, are we going to hit those long-term goals as an organization? You identify these gaps. Once you identify those gaps, you're trying to then understand how can I achieve that goal based off of this gap? And that's where data can play a really important role. Depending on that goal where you're trying to hit growth. And that's one of my things. I can use data to understand where is the future demand? Where do I have capacity constraints? Where are the constraints that aren't going to allow me to achieve that growth or market share number? So you can use a lot of data there, but that data can also help you identify opportunities. Usually, once you take the data, identify where are my gaps and how do I want to achieve that goal, you can also use data to understand, does it make sense for me to build, buy, or partner? That's the other key piece. When you're creating that strategic objective and intent, you have to almost use data to do that analysis. Which of these options make the most sense? Because sometimes it may make sense to build it. Otherwise, it's just a partner. And then from there, it's evaluating who should I be partnering with to align those goals. That's how I would start using that data.
Yeah, I agree. It's important to utilize data throughout the entire partnership lifecycle, from selecting your partner to determining how you're going to measure your success. It's important to note that you don't need every single metric of data, piece of data, but you need to have the right and focused data to help you inform your decision and identify the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Megan just brings up such a great point, because using the data to also set those goals and KPIs early on in the partnership should be key, because what does success look like, and make sure both partners align so you have something to measure throughout to determine when does it make sense to pivot our partnership, when does it make sense to continue our partnership, or do we need to change something about it?
You're not sweeping every data piece that you can pull into it. It's selecting the few KPIs both organizations can agree on that support the ultimate goal. Using those, and there may be some supporting metrics that you use to manage those underneath, but there's really just a core set, just a handful. When you don't have those KPIs up front, which is one of the core parts of the governing structure, what are some of those pitfalls that you might encounter when you just don't have everything clear where you're going?
You can end up with a lot of ambiguity in how the partnership is operating, and that can show up in things like slow or unclear decision-making, misaligned expectations, or just friction between teams in general. It's important to emphasize that you can't rush to contract without figuring those things out up front. It's okay to take your time to identify the KPIs and points of the partnership that you align on before contract. Once you're live, it's a lot harder to go back and fix those fundamentals. Without clear metrics, you don't really know how the partnership is working either in the long run. And you lose the ability to say whether you scale it, do we adjust, or do we walk away?
Without the clear goals and governance, you don't know if you're delivering value or if you're drifting off course. You might find out that one player within the partnerships thinks, hey, everything's going well, where the other ones be like, this isn't what we wanted. So when you don't have clear goals or governance, you may actually get two different perspectives of how the partnership is going. It can create friction as well as you're trying to execute, because you may have one side being everything's working perfectly because you're not measuring anything, or you might be measuring something completely different. The other one's like, hey, this isn't working for us, but you're not clear on why that's not working for us. You end up with two different goals and strategies when you're not on the same page from the beginning.
One of the things we talked a lot about was those shared goals need to include things like how much effort, how much capital, how much resources, what expertise each party is going to bring to the conversation, to the partnership, because that's also sometimes where there's a mismatch. And so some of those goals are also the investment of time and resources. I want to think about lessons learned here. You guys have both been involved in partnerships. You've both worked with clients who've had partnerships that have succeeded or failed. What are some of the key lessons learned for strategic partnerships?
Any partnership you have had, you should always have a lessons learned after. What did we learn from this? So forth. Ultimately, first is start with your why and strategic intent. It should start with that, not we really want to partner with this hospital. It should always start and go back to the strategy and the original intent why. Second, spend as much time defining what success and goals and KPIs look like as much as you're negotiating the agreement. It should be done up front as part of that negotiation agreement part. Third, culturally, alignment matters just as much as how much you operationally capabilities are. Culture makes a difference, especially you are merging for some of these strategies and partnerships, multiple organizations together. Culture plays a big part. Lastly, treat the partnerships as a living relationship that requires management. This isn't something that you're going to go to autopilot after the contract's signed. It should be a living, breathing relationship. Sometimes partnerships start off really early as a transactional or just an informal type of partnerships. And it grows over time because you're testing out, piloting how we work together. And then you continuously move through that spectrum, see how it continuously evolves.
I echo all those points, Jen. Another piece is transparency. From my experience working on the provider side, the two organizations I was working with had different capital timelines, and that started to create some friction in the overall timeline of the partnership. Those timelines weren't explicitly stated up front and communicated clearly. Over communicate where you can. It's better than no communication. Don't leave your partner in the dark. And governance is everything. Spend that time up front defining who's accountable for what metric and how you're going to work together day to day, because it is a living, breathing cycle. Once you sign the deal, that isn't the finish point. That's just the starting point. And be okay with the partnership evolving or even exiting if things aren't working the way it needs to be. There's hesitation in walking away sometimes, but deciding to walk away doesn't mean it's a failure. That's just the result of the partnership evolving.
Exiting is not a failure, especially if you do it even before you sign the deal, when you're mutually vetting each other. That can be another time where you might decide this isn't going to work, and it's okay. And you go back and either reevaluate your build buyer partner, or you reevaluate who your potential partner is and you seek an alternative. We've talked about exiting, and that may be the end of the natural life cycle of a partnership. It has evolved. It's met its purpose. Let's talk about how data drives that decision to exit, evolve, or maybe it's just a little bit of tweaking. Maybe you're not quite there yet. What do you see about the importance of data at that stage?
For that, it goes back to if you set those KPIs and those goals and you use data to continuously measure how you're doing, and both parties are seeing the results of that data and outcomes, you can use that so you're both on the same page to determine, is this partnership working? Do we need to adjust? Or maybe this isn't going to work. Let's exit. It keeps going back to that strategic goal you have and the data and KPIs set around that, and using that to continuously measure to determine when it makes sense to potentially exit as part of that partnership.
And I think that could look like either not meeting those outcomes that you set out to achieve, or it could be you achieve those goals and that's the end of the life cycle of that partnership. There's nothing else to build upon with that relationship.
You bring that up because we actually put it in the case study that we have in our publication, that example we have. And because they achieved their goals and they felt like it was still beneficial, they continued the partnership. And you reset your goals. Once you achieve them, you then do a reset as well. It can really help you to decide what does it make sense to do the next stage.
Sometimes that reset can be a expansion on that first goal, or furthering that growth objective or that referral relationship or what have you. Or it could be, you know what? We were so good at CV. Let's try neuroscience now. You can expand in different ways and move on, especially if you have developed that strong cultural connection where you're moving in the same direction. That is a great place for us to end Edge Perspectives today. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to our listeners for joining us again on this episode.